What if I told you that the person you trusted with your heart, your home, and your child could take everything from you in one single move? Imagine this for a second. You wake up thinking you're still a family, and by the end of the day, you're divorced, alone, and your child is no longer with you. No warning. No second chance. No mercy. Let me ask you something, and I really want you to answer in the comments. Backhand index pointing down. If your spouse divorced you and took full custody of your child, would you fight back, or would you walk away to protect your peace? And here's a harder question. Do you believe the legal system is always fair to mothers, or does money decide who wins? Because when my husband divorced me and took custody, everyone thought my story was over, even I did. But what happened next, what he was forced to face, changed every single life involved, forever. So before you judge, before you assume, before you pick sides, stay with me till the end, because this is not just my story. It could be yours. Point 1. The day everything was taken from me. Day my marriage officially ended did not come with shouting or dramatic accusations. There was no final argument, no slammed doors, no loud declarations of hate. Instead, it arrived quietly, almost politely, like something that had been planned long before I was ever invited into the conversation. That silence, calm, calculated, and cruel, hurt more than anger ever could. I remember the morning clearly. The house felt normal, deceptively normal. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, dust floating lazily in the air as if nothing in the world was about to change. The smell of toast still lingered in the kitchen. My child's backpack rested near the door, exactly where I had placed it the night before. Everything looked like a life still intact, but it wasn't. I stood there holding my phone, scrolling mindlessly, unaware that this would be the last morning I would wake up believing I still had a family. I didn't know that within hours, my identity would be reduced to a legal label, ex-wife, and my role as a mother would be questioned, evaluated, and nearly erased. When my husband finally spoke that day, his voice was steady. Too steady. That should have been my first warning. People don't sound that calm when they're about to destroy someone unless they've already made peace with the damage they're about to cause. I've filed for divorce, he said. No build-up. No explanation, just a sentence that split my life clean in half. Before I could even respond, before my mind could catch up to the words, he continued, as if reading from a script he had rehearsed many times. I'm also applying for full custody. That was the moment my body reacted before my brain did. My chest tightened. My ears rang. I felt dizzy, like the ground beneath me had suddenly shifted. Divorce was one thing, painful, yes, but survivable. But custody? That wasn't just a separation. That was a declaration of war. I asked him why. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Just, why? He didn't answer directly. He talked around it. Used phrases like stability, routine, best interests. He spoke the language of lawyers, not husbands. Every word sounded borrowed, rehearsed, strategic. That's when I realized something terrifying. He hadn't decided this today. He hadn't even decided it recently. He had been planning this for a long time, quietly building a case while I was busy trying to save a marriage that was already being buried. In the days that followed, everything moved fast. Too fast. Papers arrived. Meetings were scheduled. Decisions were made without me in the room. I felt like a guest in my own life, watching strangers discuss my worth, my parenting, my mental strength, as if I were an object to be assessed rather than a human being who had given everything she had to her family. What hurt the most wasn't just losing my husband. It was watching my role as a mother be questioned by people who had never seen me soothe nightmares, pack lunches, or stay awake through fevers and tears. Suddenly, my love wasn't enough. Suddenly, love needed proof. In court, I learned a painful lesson, one that many women learn too late. Emotion is not welcome there. Tears don't equal truth. Vulnerability doesn't inspire sympathy, it raises suspicion. Every time my voice trembled, it felt like a mark against me. Every time I tried to explain how deeply connected I was to my child, it was framed as emotional dependence rather than devotion. He, on the other hand, was composed. Confident. Prepared. He had documents. Witnesses. Statements, and I had a broken heart and a story that didn't fit neatly into legal language. When the judge announced the temporary custody decision, I didn't cry. I couldn't. It felt unreal, like a scene happening to someone else. Full custody, granted to him. Temporary, they said. For now, they said. But those words offered no comfort. Because for now still meant going home alone. That first night without my child was unbearable. The house felt wrong, too quiet, too empty. Every sound echoed. I walked from room to room, touching familiar objects as if they might disappear too. I stood in my child's bedroom longer than I should have, staring at the bed, the books, the half-finished drawings. No one prepares you for that kind of silence. People tell you heartbreak hurts. They're wrong. Heartbreak heals. Slowly, but it heals. What doesn't heal easily is the ache of motherhood interrupted. The instinct to listen for footsteps that never come. The habit of setting aside food for someone who isn't there. I blamed myself relentlessly. Maybe if I had spoken up sooner. Maybe if I had fought harder. Maybe if I had seen the signs. Self-blame is a dangerous place, because it keeps you trapped in the past instead of allowing you to move forward. But somewhere in the middle of that grief, something unexpected happened. I got angry, not the loud, explosive kind of anger. The quiet kind. The kind that sharpens your thoughts instead of blurring them. The kind that doesn't scream, it plans. I started replaying everything, not with regret, but with clarity. The subtle manipulations. The way he documented my worst moments while ignoring my sacrifices. The way he presented himself as the hero while quietly painting me as unstable. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about my child's well-being. This was about control, and for the first time since everything fell apart, I stopped asking why me. And started asking a different question: what if this isn't the end of my story? What if losing everything wasn't punishment, but transformation? I didn't know how I would fight back. I didn't know how long it would take. I didn't even know if I would win. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty: he had underestimated me. He thought taking custody would break me. He thought silence meant surrender. He thought I would disappear quietly. He had no idea what he was about to face. The silent war he never saw coming. Losing custody didn't break me immediately. That part came later, slowly, quietly, in moments no one else could see. In public, I looked calm. Composed. Almost numb. But inside, something dangerous was happening. Not weakness. Awareness. People assume that when a woman loses everything, she collapses. They imagine endless tears, isolation, despair. And yes, there were nights like that. Nights when I sat on the edge of my bed, holding my phone, scrolling through old pictures just to remind myself that my child was real, that my life before this wasn't a dream. But grief didn't stay grief for long. Because grief, when ignored, turns into clarity. And clarity is terrifying, especially for the person who thinks they've already won. I began to notice things I had ignored for years. The patterns. The control disguised as concern. The way he always positioned himself as reasonable while quietly pushing me into emotional corners. The way every argument ended with me apologizing, even when I didn't understand what I had done wrong. That wasn't love. That was conditioning. And the custody battle wasn't the beginning of it, it was the final move. The first thing I did wasn't dramatic. I didn't storm into a lawyer's office. I didn't make threats or declarations. I did something far more dangerous. I started listening. Listening to how people talked about me. Listening to how he described our marriage. Listening to the version of me that was being circulated in rooms I wasn't allowed to enter. And what I heard was shocking. I wasn't just being portrayed as emotional. I was being painted as unstable. Unreliable. Inconsistent. A mother who meant well but couldn't be trusted long term. That's when I understood something crucial. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a narrative. And narratives don't collapse on their own. They have to be dismantled, piece by piece. I requested supervised visits. That alone bruised my ego more than I expected. Sitting in a room, monitored, watched, evaluated, as if my love needed permission. As if motherhood could be switched on and off under observation. But I agreed. Not because I accepted their judgment. Because I understood strategy. Every visit became evidence. Every interaction mattered. I watched my words. I controlled my reactions. I documented everything. While he was confident the system favored him, I was learning how the system actually worked. Quietly. Patiently. Relentlessly. He thought my silence meant defeat. What it really meant was focus. At the same time, something else started happening, something he didn't anticipate. People started noticing the cracks in his story. Not immediately. Not dramatically. Just subtle moments. Missed pickups. Cancelled visits blamed on work emergencies. Promises made and forgotten. The same man who had fought so aggressively for custody began to struggle with the responsibility of it. Because fighting for control is not the same as showing up consistently. And children noticed that, even when adults pretend they don't. One evening, after a visit, my child hugged me tighter than usual. Longer than usual. No words. Just a grip that said everything. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't losing my child. I was being tested. And tests don't last forever. I started rebuilding my life in ways he never thought mattered. Stability. Routine. Growth. I took courses. Improved my skills. Strengthened my support system. Not for appearances, but for truth. Because real change doesn't need an audience. I stopped trying to convince people who had already chosen sides. Instead, I focused on becoming undeniable. There is power in that, terrifying power. Because when someone expects you to fall apart, and you don't, they start to panic. And he did. Subtle at first. More messages. Unnecessary questions. Attempts to provoke reactions. But I didn't give him what he wanted. No drama. No emotional outbursts. No mistakes. Just consistency. And consistency is something lies can't survive. The legal system is slow. Painfully slow. But time has a way of exposing truth. Reports began to shift. Observations changed tone. Language softened. Suddenly, I wasn't unstable. I was committed. Engaged. Focused on the child's well-being. Words matter, especially when they change direction. And while he still believed he was in control, the ground beneath him was quietly moving. But here's the part no one talks about. Reclaiming yourself after being stripped of identity is brutal. There are moments when you don't recognize who you are becoming. Strength feels foreign when you've been taught to equate it with selfishness. Confidence feels wrong when you've been rewarded for compliance. I had to unlearn everything. And unlearning is harder than starting from scratch. But I did it anyway. Because the alternative was disappearing. One night, as I sat alone, organizing documents, timelines, evidence, I smiled. Not because I was happy. But because I finally understood something he never would. This was never about custody. This was about power. And power shifts, especially when it's underestimated. He thought the war was over. He had no idea. It hadn't even truly begun. 3. The truth he couldn't hide forever. There is a moment in every long battle when silence stops being empty and starts becoming loud. For me, that moment came unexpectedly, not in court, not through a lawyer, but in the smallest cracks where truth tends to leak out when lies get tired of holding themselves together. I had spent months rebuilding my life quietly. No announcements. No public victories. Just small, deliberate steps toward stability. Meanwhile, he continued to perform confidence, the kind that looks solid on the surface but relies heavily on everyone else believing it. What he didn't understand was this: you can control a story for only so long before it begins to question you back. And that's exactly what started to happen. It began with a phone call. Not from him. From someone I didn't expect. A mutual acquaintance, hesitant, uncomfortable, choosing words carefully, the way people do when they're about to say something they're not sure they should. I don't know if this matters, they said, but some things don't add up. Those words stayed with me long after the call ended. Because once you hear them, you start looking differently. Listening differently. Remembering differently. And suddenly, moments that once felt confusing started making sense. I went back through old messages. Emails. Calendars. Conversations I had dismissed at the time because I trusted him. Patterns emerged, not dramatic, but consistent. Inconsistencies. Timelines that didn't align. Stories that changed depending on the audience. It wasn't one big lie. It was hundreds of small ones, stitched together so tightly that no one thought to pull the thread. Until now. One report caught my attention. A routine observation note, the kind that usually says nothing significant. But this time, there was a sentence that made me stop breathing for a moment. Child appeared confused by repeated changes in schedule and expressed uncertainty about primary routines. Confused. Uncertain. Those weren't my words. Those weren't emotional accusations. They were professional observations. And they contradicted the image he had worked so hard to present. At the same time, his behavior began to change. He started over-explaining. That's always a sign. People who are telling the truth don't feel the need to justify every detail. But people protecting a fragile version of events? They talk too much. They fill silence with unnecessary context. He corrected himself often. Changed phrasing mid-sentence. Referenced conversations that never happened. And each time he did, he revealed more than he realized. What shocked me most wasn't what I discovered about him. It was what I discovered about myself. I had been trained, slowly, subtly, to doubt my own perception. To question my memory. To minimize my instincts. That realization hit harder than any legal loss. Because custody can be challenged. But self-trust? Once broken, it takes real work to rebuild. And I was finally doing that work. One afternoon, during a visit, my child said something that stopped me cold. Nothing dramatic. Just a simple observation. Daddy gets mad when I ask about you. That was it. No elaboration. No accusation. But in that sentence was a truth no court document could ever fully capture. Love doesn't get angry at curiosity. Control does. I documented everything. Not obsessively. Not emotionally. Methodically. Dates. Quotes. Behaviors. I stopped reacting and started recording. And slowly, the picture became clearer, not just to me, but to the professionals involved. Because when truth appears consistently, it becomes hard to ignore. Then came the meeting. Not a hearing. Not a confrontation. A review. And for the first time, the questions weren't directed at me. They were directed at him. Clarifications requested. Explanations needed. Timelines questioned. His confidence faltered, just slightly. But enough. Afterwards, he called me. His tone was different. Not aggressive. Not cold. Concerned. That's when I knew. People don't worry when they're in control. They worry when they feel it slipping. Still, I didn't celebrate. Because this wasn't about winning. This was about truth catching up. And truth moves slowly, but relentlessly. That night, I sat alone, thinking about everything that had happened. How easily someone can rewrite reality when they're believed. How dangerous silence can be when it's misunderstood. How strength often looks like patience from the outside. I realized something powerful. I wasn't fighting to prove him wrong anymore. I was fighting to prove myself right. And that changes everything. 4. When the mask started to slip. There is a dangerous moment in every battle, the moment when the person who has been controlling the narrative realizes they are no longer the only one being believed. That moment doesn't come with an explosion. It comes with discomfort. With small reactions. With impatience that wasn't there before. I noticed it in him long before anyone else did. He stopped being calm. Not openly angry, just sharp. Defensive. His messages became shorter, his tone more urgent. He started reminding me of agreements we had never formally made, referencing understandings that existed only in his version of events. That's what fear looks like when it wears confidence as a costume. The pressure on him increased slowly, but steadily. Professionals began asking follow-up questions. Not accusations, questions. And questions are dangerous when your story depends on consistency. Every clarification forced him to repeat himself, and repetition is where lies weaken. Meanwhile, I stayed exactly the same. Same routines. Same responses. Same calm. People expect chaos from someone who's been wronged. They expect anger, breakdowns, emotional swings. When you don't give them that, it unsettles them. Especially the person who expected you to fall apart. During one review meeting, something subtle but powerful happened. A third party interrupted him. Not to challenge, just to correct a detail. A small detail. A date. A time. But he froze. For just a second. And that second changed everything. Because credibility isn't lost in dramatic confrontations, it's lost in moments of hesitation. After that, the tone shifted. Not officially. Not on paper. But in the air. I could feel it. The way people looked at him, not suspicious, just attentive. The way they listened to me, not dismissive, just open. I wasn't being evaluated anymore. I was being considered. And there's a huge difference. At home, my child's behavior began to change too. More questions. More emotions surfacing. Children adapt quickly, but they also sense tension faster than adults realize. I noticed signs of confusion, not distress, confusion. A lack of consistency that no bedtime routine could fix. That matters. Because stability isn't about where a child sleeps. It's about emotional safety. One afternoon, during a scheduled visit, he arrived late. No explanation. No apology. Just irritation. And for the first time, it wasn't documented as an isolated incident. It was documented as a pattern. Patterns are powerful. Because patterns don't care about excuses. Later that week, I received a message from him. Not hostile. Not threatening. Unsettled. He asked me if I had been saying things. I hadn't. I didn't need to. The truth doesn't require coaching. That's when it became clear. He thought I was manipulating the system. Because that's what he would have done. People often assume others operate the way they do. When manipulation is your language, honesty feels like strategy. And that misunderstanding was his biggest mistake. I wasn't winning. I was outlasting. And there's a difference. Winning implies an end. Outlasting changes the entire dynamic. I remember sitting in my car after one meeting, hands on the steering wheel, heart racing, not from fear, but from realization. The power had shifted. Not because I fought harder, but because I stayed consistent longer. And consistency exposes everything. That night, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone different. Not bitter. Not broken. Grounded. The woman looking back at me didn't need approval. She didn't need validation. She didn't need permission to exist loudly or quietly. She just needed time. And time was finally on my side. 5. The decision that changed everything. There comes a point in every long fight when tension stops building quietly and starts demanding an answer. You can feel it in the air, the pauses are heavier, the meetings shorter, the words more careful. Everyone knows something is coming, even if no one says it out loud. That's where we were. I didn't know what the decision would be. I only knew it wouldn't be small because nothing about this situation was small anymore. The notice arrived without drama. A review hearing. Mandatory attendance. Updated recommendations pending. I read it 3 times, my hands steady but my stomach tight. This wasn't another routine check-in. This was the system telling both of us, we're watching more closely now. He reacted differently. He called me immediately. That alone told me everything. For months, he had kept communication minimal, controlled, formal. Now his voice carried urgency, not panic, but something close to it. He spoke quickly, jumped from point to point, tried to sound cooperative while subtly fishing for information. What do you think they're going to do? He asked. I didn't answer, not because I didn't know, but because I didn't need to. The days leading up to the hearing were exhausting, not emotionally, mentally. Every detail mattered. Every report, every observation, every small note taken over months was now being reviewed together, not in isolation. That's the danger of patterns. Once they're seen as a whole, they can't be unseen. I stayed focused. Routine. Documentation. Calm. I didn't rehearse speeches. I didn't plan emotional appeals. I told the truth, the same truth I had been telling all along. Consistency had become my shield. On the morning of the hearing, I looked at my reflection and barely recognized the woman staring back. She wasn't afraid, she wasn't hopeful either. She was ready. That's a different kind of strength, the kind that doesn't depend on outcome, only integrity. The room felt smaller than I remembered. Same chairs. Same table, but the energy was different. Questions were sharper now. More specific. Directed not at me. At him. Clarifications about schedules. Explanations for inconsistencies. Requests for evidence where confidence had once been enough. He answered, but his rhythm was off. He corrected himself twice. Paused more than usual. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Then came the recommendation, not a final ruling. A shift. Temporary custody, reconsidered. Visitation expanded. Primary residence, under review. The words landed quietly, but their impact was seismic. This wasn't victory, this was momentum, and momentum is terrifying when you're on the wrong side of it. I felt it immediately. And his posture. In the way he avoided my eyes. He had walked into that room expecting control. He walked out realizing he no longer had it. Afterward, he didn't speak to me. Not that day. Not the next. Silence returned, but it was different now. This silence wasn't strategy. It was shock. The change affected my child too subtly, but unmistakably. More openness. More ease. Children feel when tension loosens, even slightly. It shows in their breathing, their tone, the way they settle into moments instead of bracing for them. That mattered more to me than any legal language ever could. But here's the part no one warns you about. When the balance shifts, the person losing control doesn't always react logically. Sometimes, they escalate, and that's exactly what happened next. A few days later, I received a message, carefully worded, polite on the surface, but edged with something sharp. He wanted to revisit arrangements. Privately. Without involvement. That's when I understood the risk. When people sense power slipping, they often try to reclaim it behind closed doors. I didn't respond immediately. I thought, and then I said no firmly. Clearly. Documented, that refusal marked a turning point because it told him something he hadn't believed before. I wasn't afraid of him anymore, and fear is the foundation of control. That night, as I lay awake, I didn't replay arguments or imagine worst-case scenarios. I thought about the road ahead. Long. Slow. Demanding, but no longer impossible. For the first time since everything began, the future didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a path. 6. When he lost control, everything came out. There is a very specific moment when a person realizes they are no longer in charge of the outcome. It doesn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It comes quietly, in the form of desperation disguised as confidence. That's exactly where he was now. The shift in power didn't make him retreat. It made him reckless. And recklessness reveals things patience never could. After I refused to handle anything privately, his behavior changed almost overnight. The calm, controlled version of him, the one everyone trusted, started slipping. Messages came late at night. Then early mornings. Questions that didn't need answers. Statements framed as concern but loaded with accusation. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Think about what's best for everyone. We can still fix this if you cooperate. Cooperate. That word told me everything. To him, cooperation didn't mean compromise. It meant compliance. And when compliance was no longer guaranteed, the mask cracked. Soon, the system noticed too. Reports reflected tension during exchanges. Communication was noted as increasingly strained. One entry described him as visibly frustrated during a routine interaction, a description I had never seen attached to his name before. That mattered. Because image was his strongest weapon. And now it was starting to turn against him. Then came the incident. Unexpected. Unnecessary. Unavoidable. During a scheduled exchange, something small went wrong. A delay. A miscommunication. Nothing serious, nothing that should have escalated. But it did. His voice rose. His tone sharpened. He said things he shouldn't have said, not loudly, not violently, but clearly enough for others to hear. Not emotional words. Controlling ones. And once words like that leave your mouth in the wrong setting, they don't go back in. My child froze. That's the detail that stayed with me. Not fear, confusion. And confusion in a child is louder than crying. The moment was documented. Not dramatized. Not exaggerated. Just recorded. That single entry did more damage to his case than months of my silence ever could. After that, everything accelerated. Additional reviews were scheduled. Professionals requested individual conversations. Suddenly, the careful distance he had relied on disappeared. He wasn't directing the process anymore. He was responding to it. And he hated that. He called me again. This time, there was no politeness. He accused me, indirectly, of course. Suggested manipulation. Implied I was turning people against him. The irony was almost unbearable. I didn't argue. I said one sentence and ended the call. I'm letting the truth speak for itself. Silence followed. Not strategic silence. The kind that comes after realizing you said too much. That week was exhausting in a way I hadn't experienced before. Not emotionally, but spiritually. Carrying yourself with integrity while someone else unravels is heavier than fighting openly. There's no release. No explosion. Just endurance. And endurance changes you. What surprised me most was how clearly others started seeing what I had lived with for years. The impatience. The need to control outcomes. The discomfort when questioned. It wasn't dramatic. It was obvious. And once something becomes obvious, it can't be explained away. The hardest part of all this wasn't the legal pressure. It was watching my child navigate the tension. Children don't need explanations, they need safety. And safety doesn't come from power. It comes from emotional regulation. That difference became impossible to ignore. One evening, after a long day of meetings and calls, I sat alone and felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because the fight was over, but because I finally understood. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't too sensitive. I had been responding normally to an abnormal situation. And now, other people could see it too. The next official update confirmed what I already sensed. Additional oversight. Adjusted recommendations. Closer monitoring. No punishment. Just accountability. And accountability terrifies people who rely on control. He reacted badly. Not publicly. Not dramatically. Privately. More messages. More pressure. More attempts to pull me into emotional reactions. But it was too late. I had crossed a line internally, the one where fear lives. And once you cross that line, there's no going back. That night, I realized something important. This chapter wasn't about custody. It wasn't even about him. It was about breaking free from a dynamic that had defined me for too long. I wasn't just fighting for my child anymore. I was fighting for my voice. And I was winning, not loudly, not quickly, but undeniably. 7. When the system spoke, and he couldn't argue anymore. There are moments in life when you realize the fight is no longer yours alone. When the weight you've been carrying quietly is finally acknowledged by forces bigger than both of you. That's what happened next, not suddenly. Not dramatically, but permanently. Up until now, everything had felt like a slow, grinding process, observation after observation, note after note, pressure building without release. But behind the scenes, something critical was happening. Conversations I wasn't part of. Evaluations I didn't witness. Conclusions forming quietly, based not on emotion, but on patterns, and patterns don't lie. The notice came early in the morning, formal. Clear. Unavoidable. A comprehensive review had been completed. Recommendations were finalized. Immediate adjustments were required. I read it slowly, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of what those words meant. This wasn't another step, this was a decision. The meeting that followed felt different from every other one before it. There was no tension in the room. No defensiveness. No performance, just seriousness. They spoke carefully, but firmly. They referenced timelines, documented behaviors, observed responses, not selectively, not emotionally, but holistically. And for the first time since this nightmare began, the picture they described sounded like my reality. They acknowledged instability, not mine. They acknowledged control issues, not mine. They acknowledged emotional inconsistency, not mine. I didn't interrupt. I didn't explain. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. Then came the words I will never forget, in the best interest of the child. Those words had once been used to take everything from me. Now, they were being used to give something back. Custody arrangements, revised. Primary residence, restructured. Decision-making authority, rebalanced. This wasn't revenge, this was correction. I looked at him for the first time in that room, really looked. He wasn't angry. He was stunned, because people who rely on control never prepare for accountability. They don't imagine a world where their version of reality isn't accepted as fact, and now, there was no one left to convince. What followed wasn't celebration. It was quiet. A deep, grounding quiet, the kind that settles into your bones and tells you something is finally over, even if the road ahead is still long. The first day my child spent more time with me again wasn't cinematic. No tears. No speeches, just normal moments. Breakfast. Laughter. Familiar routines slowly finding their place again, and that's when it hit me hardest. This is what stability actually looks like, not control. Not perfection, presence. But here's the truth no one prepares you for. Winning back space in your child's life doesn't erase what you went through. It transforms you. I wasn't the woman I had been before this started. I was stronger, but not hardened. More aware, but not bitter. More careful, but no longer afraid. I had learned the cost of silence. And the power of patience. He tried to speak to me afterward, not aggressively. Not manipulatively, almost, unsure. That was new, and that's when I knew the dynamic had truly shifted. I wasn't reacting to him anymore. He was adjusting to me. That night, after my child fell asleep, I sat alone and allowed myself to feel everything I had postponed: the grief, the rage, the exhaustion, and also pride. Not loud pride, quiet pride, the kind that comes from surviving something that was designed to break you. I thought about every woman who had been told she was too emotional. Every mother who had been made to feel replaceable. Every person who had been underestimated because they chose dignity over chaos. And I understood something deeply: the system didn't save me. I saved myself, by staying consistent long enough for the truth to catch up. This wasn't the end of the story, but it was the end of his control over it, and that made all the difference. If you've ever been silenced, underestimated, or rewritten by someone else's narrative. If you stayed patient while the world doubted you. If you chose integrity over reaction, comment below. Backhand index pointing right. The truth always wins. And tell me this, I really want your answer. Backhand index pointing down. Do you believe justice comes from fighting louder, or from standing firm long enough that lies collapse on their own? If this story touched you, like, share, and stay till the end, because what happens next will show how real healing begins, not just for me, but for my child.